Hello everyone, I am Demented Kirby, and welcome to my channel, the Commander Tavern. The Commander Tavern is a channel dedicated to my favorite Magic the Gathering format. The Brewery is a series on this channel showcasing my spicy brews and other deck techs. On this episode of the Brewery, I will be presenting a brew in the spirit of 2017 holiday season, where for 6 weeks the Rules Committee unbanned the majority of silver-bordered cards. However, the only silver-bordered card in this deck is its commander, Grimlock Dinobot Leader. This makes it incredibly easy to change the deck into an entirely legal one should someone in the pod object to playing with Grimlock. But hopefully 6 weeks of tame silver-bordered shenanigans can happen every year during the holiday season. If you're a patron of the Commander Tavern, then chances are that you saw this episode earlier. Grimlock is a legendary artifact creature that's a 4/4 Autobot for 1 generic, 1 red, and 1 green, and 1 white. He has a Lord ability that gives dinosaurs, vehicles, and other transformers +2/+0. As defined by Mark Rosewater himself, Transformer is defined as either a character from the Transformer universe that is a Transformer, or a creature that transforms, meaning any double-faced cards that uses the transform keyword action. However, he's also posted on his blog that creatures with meld also counts as Transformers. Notwithstanding, if you use Transformers toys for tokens due to Mishra's Toy Workshop, those tokens also get the buff. However, as I mentioned earlier, since Grimlock is the only silver-bordered card in the deck, this particular brew isn't running Mishra's Toy Workshop. Also, this brew isn't running any vehicles or double-faced cards. Its other ability is its transform ability. Unlike most of the transform cards, Grimlock can transform back and forth by just paying 2 generic mana and transforming a Transformer's toy. This means that you can have Grimlock in play before turn 4 and then transform in the next turn when it can attack to swing in for 8 with trample. Since the purpose of running Grimlock is to pump our dinosaurs while also being a potential 8/8 commander with trample for just 4 mana, it's still possible to use the deck as is, but by switching out Grimlock for Gahiji Honored One. Keep it available in case anyone in the pod objects to Grimlock, even if you inform them that there are no other silver-bordered cards in the deck. In and of itself, Gahiji is also a great commander, so the only feel bads is the disappointment in not being able to run the deck using Grimlock. In fact, one of the reasons I was inspired to make this brew is by the recent reveal of Optimus Prime Inspiring Leader, no pun intended. That card would be an outstandingly amazing inclusion in a Grimlock Werewolf tribal deck. Unfortunately, only a handful of people in the world possess it. I mentioned that this brew will be a dinosaur tribal deck, yet it's not full-blown dinosaur tribal since it's only going to focus on dinosaurs with hate bear abilities and enrage. This means that the deck also runs ways to trigger enrage besides combat. Additionally, I'm also running other creatures and effects that trigger when they receive damage, not just enraging dinosaurs. So first, let's take a look at how we're going to be consistently giving out damage in a controlled environment, and then see how this benefits us as well as detriments our opponents. The best way to go about it is by dealing damage to everything. 2 ways of dealing 1 damage to everything is with Fire Ants and Subterranean Spirit. Since our creatures that trigger when receiving damage don't have flying, they're all liable to these effects. What's great about these 2 creatures is that they don't damage us, but also don't damage themselves. The Ants states that it pings every other creature, while the Spirit has protection from red, so it receives no damage from itself. Having protection from red also protects it from the Ants and Pyrohemia. Be careful with the Ants though, the Spirit can damage them. So if you have both in play, tap the Ants unless you really have to tap down both. However, the best card for damaging everything is the aforementioned Pyrohemia. For just 1 red mana, you can deal 1 damage to each creature and play at instant speed. Be careful though, if there are any creatures on the battlefield at the end of a turn, you have to sacrifice it. It's important to note that this enchantment harms us as well since it says all players. That being said, if we have the mana and more life than an opponent, we can sink all our red mana into it and win the match. If that's not the case, we do have ways to recover or at least not die from it. Thanks to Personal Sanctuary, if we use Pyrohemia during our own turn, we don't get burned by it. Thanks to Personal Sanctuary, we also don't take damage from pain lands we tap during our own turn. That means that Battlefield Forge, Brushland, Carplusian Forest, and City of Brass won't ping us if we tap them for mana during our own turn. I'm also running Imperial Ceratops. Every time it receives damage, we gain 2 life. If we're activating Pyrohemia to damage all creatures and players, we actually gain 1 net life each time we do this thanks to this dinosaur. But what about our dinosaurs? Sure, we can protect ourselves, but we can't just indefinitely damage them. They'll die. Well, the deck runs cards like Rite of Passage and Bellowing Aegisart. As long as we're dealing damage 1 point at a time, if the creature would survive that damage, it gets a +1/+1 counter. This makes it able to survive another 1 damage. We can do this indefinitely in order to make them survive each 1 damage. Not only that, but we make them huge as well. On that note, since we want our dinosaurs to only receive 1 damage, the deck is running Temple Altisar. At least with the dinosaurs, this one makes all damage they would receive be reduced to only 1. This is great for combat too. We can also simply make our creatures indestructible. Avacyn, Angel of Hope, and Eldrazi Monument making our creatures indestructible is key since it doesn't prevent them from receiving damage. They prevent them from dying due to damage. They also protect against board wipes and targeted removal, so there's that too. Avacyn is obviously the best of the two because she grants indestructible to all of our permanents, but she's incredibly uncomfortable to cast. The Monument might require a sacrifice every one of our upkeeps, but that won't be an issue. Soon enough we'll see why. Another source of indestructible is Hammer of Nazan. Equipping this to a creature will make them indestructible, and it has the added bonus of being potentially equipped for free. Although it can only protect a single creature, sometimes it's one creature we need more than others to survive. Maybe it's our commander or any other value creature. Another way to make not just our creatures but all of our non-planeswalkers permanents have indestructible is with Elspeth Knight Errant's Emblem. If we're able to ultimate Elspeth, we won't ever have to worry about damage or destroy effects killing our creatures. It might seem like wishful thinking, but if we're pinging creatures and have dinosaurs on the board, we have more than enough ways to protect Elspeth until she ultimates, at least from creature threats. Besides her emblem, her other 2 abilities are also relevant. Her first ability makes a soldier token, which can be used for chump blocking or tribute to Eldrazi Monument. Her second ability is also useful since it gives a giant growth type boost plus flying to a creature. Giving this to Grimlock when it's transformed into its 8/8 form makes it a 2-turn clock. Even if with all these effects your board state still gets destroyed somehow, a trusty Elixir of Immortality can at least shuffle your graveyard back into your library while also gaining you 5 life, which is relevant in this deck. Alright, so now that we know how we'll be enraging while also protecting our creatures, what are the benefits of doing so? For one thing, is the entire goal of the deck, taking advantage of damage for value. Our main win cons are just that, channeling and rerouting damage. For example, Boros Reckoner and Spite-Mare can each deal the same damage they receive to any other target, even if they don't survive the damage. This means that we can use that damage to target opponents' creatures, planeswalkers, or their face. Similar effects are found on Mog Maniac, Sun-Crowned Hunters, and Needletooth Raptor, the only exception being that they specify which kind of target they give the damage to. Fortunately, the damage dealt by these 2 dinosaurs is constant, so we can ping them for 1, and they still give out the damage specified on their ability. You can also use Apex Altisar to wipe an entire board of creatures, if it has indestructible, with damage. When its enraged triggers, it fights another creature. Fighting that creature has it receive damage. If it survives, it can continue chaining its triggers until it potentially fights every creature for each opponent that they control. If any of your opponent's creatures survive, just ping the Altisars to start the fight chain all over again. Coalhauler Swine deals the same damage it receives to all players, but that's fine if we're gaining life or preventing the damage dealt to us. Again, as long as we have more life than opponents, we can deal as much damage to this creature as necessary in order to win the game. The best creature the deck possesses to take out an opponent with this method is Stuffy Doll. Although it's linked to a single opponent, it has many uses. It costs 5 generic, but that just makes it easier to cast in a 3-color deck. It has built-in indestructible, so it makes for a great blocker too, which leads to potential political plays. If you link the doll to the arch enemy, then you can just have the other players attack you with a non-trampling fatty that the doll can block in order to deal some serious damage to that player. Perforos, God of the Forge, is another way of dealing damage to all opponents. This god is great for token strategies, and this deck also creates tokens via synergistic interactions. Polyraptor, Sprouting Phytohydra, and Hornet Nest each create tokens when dealt damage. However, the best of these 3 are the first 2 since they create copies of themselves. That means that they're cloned exponentially as you distribute damage. For example, if you activate Pyrohemia once, Polyraptor creates a token of itself. Then, if you activate it again, each Polyraptor creates a token of itself. Now you have 4 of them in play. If you do it once more, you get 8 of them at the end in play. What's great about this is that you can do this indefinitely even if the originals die because the tokens created are created without points of damage. Doing this with Perforos in play is a sure way to deal some serious damage to opponents. You can also achieve indefinite damage with other combos too, like Cacophodon, and any mana rock that taps for red, or with any creature that taps to ping damage. For example, if you tap down Arcane Signet to pay for Pyrohemia, you can then untap the Signet with the Cacophodon after it takes damage. You can then do it all over again. You can also do something similar with Fire Ants or Subterranean Spirit. When you tap either down to ping creatures, it triggers Cacophodon, and then you can untap the pinger. An interesting way you can use Cacophodon is to untap Cavern of Souls when playing against control players. That way you can cast multiple dinosaurs in a single turn without fear of having them countered. And if all else fails, Kessig Wolf Run is still a pretty decent way to get some serious damage into an opponent's face, especially with Grimlock. So it's also a viable win con. Damage isn't the only way the deck deals with threats either. The deck runs Trapjaw Tyrant. This dinosaur is able to straight up exile creatures until it leaves the battlefield. This is an ideal carrier for Swiftfoot Boots, Lightning Greaves, or the previously mentioned Hammer of Nazan. If you're able to ping it multiple times without killing it, or during each turn, you have the potential to exile all creatures your opponents control and then swing in with the ultimate Alpha Strike. Even then, it's not the most brutal dinosaur in the deck for removal effects. That honor goes to Silver-clad Ferocidons. Having opponents sacrifice their permanents bypasses Indestructible, Hexproof, Shroud, Protection, etc. Oh, and it affects all opponents when it receives damage. So definitely try and deal it one damage point at a time so that it triggers each time. Other ways of taking advantage of our creatures is with our shards. Combine this with the previously mentioned creatures that create tokens when they receive damage, and you're able to destroy artifacts and enchantments at instant speed. This is especially handy against protective artifacts or enchantments that opponents might use to prevent getting targeted or damaged by our effects. Decimate is also great at getting rid of multiple targets at once, which is clutch in a multiplayer game. Fortunately, if any target becomes illegal when it's Decimate's turn to resolve, it won't fizzle, it'll simply destroy what it can. I mentioned this incorrectly in my previous video, so I do apologize, but I did pin a comment clarifying that, though thanks to the viewer who pointed it out. This deck is also running Beast Within, Chaos Warp, and Scour from Existence as ways to get rid of any permanent on the board, whether by destroying it, tucking it, or exiling it, because it's important to run responses in your decks. One last card I want to mention isn't an answer per se, but it does help at slowing down opponents while also being a dinosaur, and that's Kinjali's Sunwing. This hinders opponents by denying them hasty attackers as well as blockers until their next turn. It's also a 2/3 flyer that's a 4/3 flyer when Grimlock is on the battlefield. And in order to have responses in hand, you have to draw cards. Fortunately, there are plenty of synergistic cards that suit the strategies of the deck. Whenever Ripjaw Raptor is dealt damage, we draw a card. The bonus is that it's a dinosaur. Runic Armasaur is another dinosaur that helps us draw, but this one does so whenever an opponent taps a land or creature for anything that isn't adding mana to their mana pool. Since the deck runs a lot of fatties, Soul's Majesty and Return of the Wild Speaker helps us draw cards thanks to that. With Grimlock alone, we're able to draw 8 cards off if it's in the dinosaur mode. Greater Good also does the same thing while being on an enchantment, which makes it better since it can be reused. However, you have to discard 3 cards each time you activate it and sacrifice a creature too. But that's fine since the deck makes tokens as well. Now that I mentioned creating creatures, Collective Unconscious and Shamanic Revelation prize us for our creature-based strategy since they have us drawing the same amount of cards as creatures we have on the battlefield. Shamanic Revelation has the added bonus of gaining us 4 life for each creature we control with the power greater than 4. That's great since we want to try and have more life than our opponents. In case we draw into too many cards at once, the deck's running Reliquary Tower in order to not have to discard down to 7 during our cleanup phase. Other ways we can draw into the deck is curiously not from our own library. The deck's running Stolen Strategy and Italy Primal Storm. These cards not only fun to play, but they also hinder our opponents. Stolen Strategy lets us literally steal our opponent's cards from the top of their library at the beginning of our upkeep. Then, if there's anything we don't cast, it stays exiled. This is amazing because we're essentially drawing the same amount of cards as players in the game during each of our turns. Italy, however, apart from being a dinosaur, which is a plus, can cheat whatever everyone has at the top of their library, and we don't even need to connect with combat damage either. It triggers when it attacks. So before blockers are even assigned, we exile the top card of each library and cast any amount of those cards for free. Another way to cheat cards for free is with Gishath Sun's Avatar. Besides being a 7/6 with Trample, Vigilance, and Haste for 8 mana, whenever it deals combat damage to a player, we reveal that many cards from the top of our library and put any dinosaurs there onto the battlefield. Then we bottom deck the rest in a random order. That's insane. Although this deck isn't full-blown Dinosaur tribal, 18% of the deck is dinosaurs. With 7 power, there's a high likelihood that it will cheat at least one dinosaur after attacking, which is a great way to bypass their high mana cost. And speaking of high mana cost, the deck runs plenty of different ways to ramp and get the mana flowing. Fortunately, there are 3 cards that achieve this while synergizing with the deck: Raging Raptors, Regal Behemoth, and Wayward Swordtooth. Whenever Raging Raptors takes damage, they ramp for a basic land. If you're able to ping them twice each turn, that's 8 basic lands you can ramp in a single round. If they're indestructible, then you can ping them indefinitely until you're able to ramp into all of your basic lands. Regal Behemoth grants us the Monarch when it enters the battlefield, and while you're the Monarch, lands you control tap for an extra mana. Wayward Swordtooth allows us to play an additional land each turn. This is great if we're digging through our deck. Notwithstanding, the deck also runs conventional ramp like Farseek, Nature's Lore, and 3 Visits. Each of these ramp spells only cost 2 and have the potential of bringing a dual-type land onto the battlefield. It's also running Skyshroud Claim, Hunting Wilds, and Ranger's Path. These spells also have the potential of bringing 2 dual-type lands onto the battlefield as long as they share the forest type. Since they bring in 2 forests, they cost twice as much as the aforementioned ramp spells. The deck also runs Mox Amber, Mox Diamond, and Mox Opal in order to have free rocks that can tap for any mana. Recall that these rocks have the potential of going infinite with Pyrohemia and Cacophodon. Since the deck does include Fatties and Grimlock requires mana to transform, the deck's also running Soul Ring, Mana Crypt, and Mana Vault for good measure. It's worth noting that if you have Personal Sanctuary in play, you don't have to worry about the damage caused by Mana Crypt and Mana Vault during your upkeep. The rest of the deck are the lands. Apart from those already mentioned, I'm running all 10 fetch lands, all 3 dual lands, all 3 shock lands, Ancient Tomb, Command Tower, Mana Confluence, Reflecting Pool, and Rift's Grove. It also runs 3 of each basic snow land in case opponents run anything that benefits us for it. And as with all of my deck techs, you don't have to run all of these more expensive mana sources like the fetch lands, the dual lands, and the Moxen. Any other potential mana rocks you can afford at a budget would work great for this deck as well. This brew is just an idea of how to build around Grimlock Dinobot Leader. Other more popular options include using him as the best commander for a werewolf tribal deck. However, you can also use him at the helm of a vehicles deck including the Pala, SRAM, and other support cards, or maybe a balanced mix between the 3. In any case, as is, this deck is a lot of fun to pilot and play. If you're interested in the deck list of this spicy brew of mine, you can find a link to it down in the description. I would like to thank all my patrons for supporting me, and a quick shout out to all my higher tier patrons, the brewers, for their patronage. And to everyone, thanks for watching this episode of the Brewery on the Commander Tavern. I am Demented Kirby, and happy brewing.